Tell us your proposition, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of committee. As you might know, this is the 25th anniversary of the date this November whenever folks in your districts voted to legalize gambling. Believe it or not, 25 years ago. Since that time, on the premise, by the way, that we educate our kids. And they were promised at the time, if they kept a B average, that they would get a college education whenever they got out of school. We haven't been able to keep our word. 25 years ago, under full intentions, that was our intentions, is whenever our kids worked hard, earned a B average, that they'd be able to get a full ride. As a result of not declining revenues with the lottery, but as a result of 1 million more people coming to Georgia, it has stripped our ability to be able to fully fund the Hope Scholarship. That also includes the Hope Grant, pre-K funding, and some of the other needs that we've needed in higher education. So what you have before you, Mr. Chairman, is only a bare bones conversation, if you will, about setting up what needs to happen to fill the gap. This particular legislation, and I'll walk through it in just a minute, sets a minimum investment of our top tiered destination resort at $2 billion. This particular investment will generate between 5,000 to 10,000 jobs just in this one location. Ladies and gentlemen, there's some of the cities I represent that aren't that large. How much are they going to ask us to generate these jobs? Not one single dime in tax incentives, local or state. There's a companion bill, if you might remember a couple of years ago, that needs to travel along with this, and I don't see Representative Powell here because he believes in this as strongly as I do. To be able to fully fund the Hope Scholarship, the Hope Grant, and pre-K funding, we need to be able to cap, with a cost of living index, our rising rates of tuition for those Hope Scholarship recipients. That needs to ride along as well. And if you will, Mr. Chairman, I'll start. This is the substitute to House Bill 58. Again, it is bare bones. It is the minimum requirements for us to move forward with this. Are we getting a lot of feedback?
No, I just couldn't see.
Oh, good.
Microphone in front of your face.
We'll start. Of course, this is known as the Destination Resort Act. If you'll turn with me to page 5, beginning on line 150, it talks about the Gaming Commission, which is the meat and potatoes of this particular bill. And the commission shall consist of 5 members, 3 by the governor appointed, 1 by each lieutenant governor and the speaker. If you'll move over to page 7, line 233, it talks about the establishment of the Destination Resort Trust Fund, where all the deposits for these excise taxes and others shall be deposited. If you'll now move to page 9, it talks about the powers of the commission and their licensure. Page 11, and this is where I'll spend most of my time. Beginning on line 356, we have 3 different types of licenses for these destination resorts. The first shall be with a population in excess, with a county in population in excess of over 900,000. They shall have a minimum of $2 billion invested. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a minimum. They shall have a minimum of a 1,000 room hotel. That's the first and the primary. The secondary license shall be a population of a county with a population of at least 250,000, not more than 900,000, and shall have a minimum investment of at least $450 million. And of course, all of these have to be close to a convention center. The 2 tertiary licenses, which were left out of the first bill, that both the Senate and House versions, this will have a population of less than 250,000 people in that county and shall have a minimum of $150 million invested in that destination resort. As you'll notice on line 369, no one company may hold more than one destination resort license concurrently. That's important, that we do not want all 4 of these licenses to be taken up by the same company. Line 370 is also important because this is a destination resort and not the C word, which I'm not going to use. The application shall demonstrate that the destination resort shall have over 60% of its revenues derived from non-gaming sources. That's important. In my mind, that's what distinguishes these from the C word. The applicant shall have the ability to implement and train employee residents of the state, this is on line 377, for the jobs available for this destination resort, including the ability to train low-income persons. Page 12, line 384. The entertainment facilities within the destination resort shall have a maximum capacity of 3,500 people. This is your entertainment. Page 14, line 480. Again, a plan for training residents in this state for the jobs for the destination resort. The training shall enable low-income persons to qualify for jobs at this destination resort. A key piece of this legislation. Page 15, beginning on lines 509. The application for the destination resort license shall be submitted along with a non-refundable $1 million to be used for the commission to defray cost and background checks and so forth. If you will, on line 515, the application for the resort license shall have a one-time license fee of $50 million. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to amend as we move along for the primary license to be $50 million, the secondary license to be $20 million, and each of the tertiary licenses to be $10 million each.
What was the second one, please, Mr. Chairman?
The secondary license shall be $20 million. $10 million each. If you'll move with me to page 20, line 685. This has to do with the anniversary date and the issuance of the initial destination resort license. They shall pay a non-refundable annual license fee of $5 million. Page 21, line 711. This talks about the Hope Scholarship, and it says that 70% shall be transferred to the Student Finance Commission for the purposes of the Hope Scholarship. 30% shall be transferred to the Student Finance Commission for the purpose of funding needs-based scholarships. Line 734 is a compulsive. This is a very important piece of the legislation, something that was really left out of the original legislation 25 years ago. And it says that a compulsive and addictive gambling prevention program shall be funded from an annual non-refundable regulatory fee of $250,000 paid by each of the destination resort licenses. If you have a gambling problem, we have grants set up within the bill. And if you will move to page 26, line 889. This is also an important piece of the bill that was not thought about 25 years ago, and we want to correct that now. Before the beginning of each legislative session, the Commission shall submit to the General Assembly for review its annual report of gross revenue, net revenue, and average depreciation of all licenses. a key piece of this legislation. Mr. Chairman, as I said, this was bare bones, totally open for amendment, and now that Representative Powell is here, I'll restate what I said earlier. As you might recall, we had a companion bill to this a couple of years ago, and I believe it's imperative that it travel along with this, that caps the rate of increase for tuition for the Hope Scholarship recipients to no more than the cost of living index, so that we can fully fund Hope Scholarship once again, and the Hope Grant, and eventually fund pre-K funding to the needs that level it needs to be. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll open up to any questions.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm still on here.
Going, huh? Maybe, oh, there you go, little button back there. All right. We got a couple of, well, all right, y'all just keep lighting it up. We got all day. I think number 22 was first. Chairman Harrell. Oh, 21. Okay. See if you're on.
Okay, sure. Very good. Chairman Stevens, appreciate the quick overview of a significant piece of legislation. I'm sure you're obviously much more familiar, so I'll ask a couple of questions that I'm sure have already been vetted, but just for my own edification. So we're establishing this gaming commission, and I presume that these regulatory fees and revenues are going to be on deposit with the commission. It's the desire, I suspect, that the commission is then solely funded through the industry.
Yes.
And the revenues generated through the industry to all their activities, their regulatory activities, their investigative activities, and so forth.
That is the intent.
And does this bill establish the tax rate on those gross revenues? And I may have missed that.
That piece, I believe, is in the constitutional amendment, but it can be added to the bill.
Okay.
It should be, the number that was agreed to, as you might recall, 2 years ago, we're looking at 12%, but we believe that 20% is a number that we can live with. And by doing that, by not raising it to 40 and 50%, we get a larger investment. What we're looking for here, ladies and gentlemen, is a destination resort and not a gambling facility. Again, 60% of the revenues have to come outside of that, so it's a very good question. But I believe 20% might be the target that we're looking for to get the maximum investment for a destination resort.
And on page 11, we establish the 4 licenses.
Yes.
I'm sure there are a number of reasons that went into this, but establishing a gaming commission with professionals, industry experts, why are we not leaving it to the commission to determine the number and location of licenses throughout the state?
I believe, and I think most people believe, we need to have a distance, if you will, and a protected zone. And of course, that would come under the purview of the Gaming Commission. But in the constitutional amendment, you're going to see a total of 6. And again, to add more value, but it would require us coming back and passing another piece of legislation to increase that number. This limits it currently to 4 in the bill. But of course, we don't want to become a low-end gambling C word again. We really are looking for a high-end investment for tourism. So limiting the number protects their area, if you will, and again, it allows us to get a larger investment for these facilities.
And right at that same location on page 11, we always hear about population bills. Can you speak to adding population in this measure?
Be glad to, and I'm open to suggestions by the committee. Be glad to delete all that. We're always looking to move away from population bills. And I have no problem at all in making this a minimum distance for protection purpose, or to leave that to the discretion of the Gaming Commission. And if you will, typically these things are going to be built wherever the population is. So it's
Correct. Yeah.
the right size is going to fit the investment.
All right. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Representative Rakestraw, I think you were next, number 22.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. I am a co-signer on the bill, and one of the things that I want to see us do with this is solve a huge problem in our state and our nation, and that's with mental health and addiction. We have a chronic problem, and I see this as a way to have a voluntary tax to solve a problem, which actually gets to the root of the people that are against it, you know, have said they're against it, you know, the ABCs, the addiction, the bankruptcy, the crime. And if we have the money to treat these people, then we don't really have those problems, because if you're treating people then and getting them whole and healed, then, you know, you heal the addictions. The crime is all related to drugs, and you can fix the blight issues around the casinos. And you know, us being an international city, I think it's important for us to have this type of destination resort, because, you know, we're bringing a lot of conventions to town and a lot of tourism, and, you know, they need a place that is unique to, you know, for entertainment. And so I support many aspects of this, but, you know, I don't want to just take the money and put it into Hope. And to me, one of the issues we have with Hope wasn't that it was underfunded, but because we expanded it to include pre-K and, you know, those type of programs, you know, that's caused to me some issues with us being short on the money. But would you be open to amending this to include addiction treatment and not just gambling addiction? Because the addictions come out, you know, in many ways: drugs, alcohol, gambling, and I think the statistic is only 11% of the population gets treated, and we have a huge amount of our population, and it's driving homelessness, it's driving, you know, criminal activity, it's driving suicide rates. You know, there's so many areas, and it's, you know, part of what's breaking families apart and causing generations of people to become addicted, and it's become, you know, such a chronic problem that I see this as an opportunity to finally fund something that we should have been funding all along. Are you open to amending this to include that?
Well, of course, we do have the gambling addiction piece in there, and that's in the form of a grant. But if you can sell this committee, this is only a framework for us to work from. So if you can sell this committee on any of the addiction pieces on there, it's I'll leave that up to the lady.
Yeah, so if we're going to treat addictions, I'd like to see us treat them all and not just gambling.
Point taken.
And then the tax rates that you're talking about, in other states, I know they have a much higher tax rate. Is that a lower rate because we're charging the annual licensing fees, or how do other states do that as far as their annual licensing renewal? I think you said it's like $5 million per license annually?
Annually, yes. It's initially it's $50 million.
Okay.
For the primary, again, $20 million for the secondary, 10 apiece for the tertiaries. And these are numbers that if we're looking to get, and that's been for all the hearings that we've had, that seems to be the issue that's always come out, is as you increase the tax rate, then you lower the amount of the investment. And of course, the ability to keep a facility, a destination resort, well into the future depends on the ability for them to reinvest capital back into these destination resorts, which is, again, why we want to keep the tax rate something that's competitive. And again, 20% seems to be that number.
And so, but do other states have the annual renewal fees at the
Yes.
same? Okay.
Very
So-
similar.
All right. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am. Number 23, Representative Deffenbaugh. That's you.
Thank you. Chairman, I appreciate a lot of this which is being said, but just a couple quick questions I have. You probably have the answers to them. Where are these customers going to come from?
They'll be, it's a destination resort, so many of these customers, we heard in our hearings before that people were leaving Georgia, going to Cherokee, and going to Alabama, and going to Orlando, Florida, taking $400 to $600 million a year of Georgia Hope Scholarship money with them. So a lot of these customers are going to be the people that typically are going out of state now, and to keep these at home. But the majority of these folks are going to be those folks that come from out of state. They're gonna be tourists.
Okay, and they're going to stop going to the other Cs?
There's, what we're going to propose with a $2 billion investment is gonna be something twice as large as you see in Maryland. It'll be something like the South doesn't have. So the type of customer we're gonna have, or the type of clientele, is gonna be those that may visit out of state, but we think we can capture those here in Georgia. And if they're gonna buy a lottery ticket, that was the other argument, that we're gonna cannibalize the lottery, which is the reason we want this investment so high, is the type of clientele that buys a lottery ticket are not the same clientele that you're gonna see going to these destination resorts.
But I do know in some instances up along the Atlantic coast where they have a lot of Cs, or did have, they're losing some of them because of whatever lack of customers, I'm assuming. And why wouldn't we be in that situation 5 years from now?
Again, that's why we're talking about the tax rate. If you'll notice, some of these states have a tax rate of 50%. It's hard to keep reinvesting capital whenever you're taxing somebody at that particular rate. So, you know, after studying this, the 20% tax rate should be enough to keep these destination resorts pristine.
And then one last question, if you don't mind. The compulsive, addictive gambler you're putting money into, and who do you, I'm sure there's some set person or some set board or something that's going to implement this, isn't there?
Yes, and each of these will put in a total of $1 million a year into this particular fund, which is then given out in the form of a grant.
To whom? From whom? Who's going to grant?
As directed by the
board.
Gaming Commission.
Okay. Thank you.
I think we heard somebody testify a year or so ago that in some areas in New Jersey, somewhere it's like 60 or 70% tax rate, I believe.
And those are
That's-
failing.
Yeah, those are the
I
ones that
might
are
add.
failing there, from what I remember. Number 27.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Ben. Yes, sir.
Mr. Stevens, this framework is from, I'm sure there's other, like Biloxi and Vegas. I mean, what other states have this same framework, or is this mirrored from, hopefully not, Atlantic City?
No, this, we took the majority of the original language from the Las Vegas model.
What do they do with the proceeds from, the profits from it, the revenue? What does that state do with it?
That goes, that's a good question. That it goes into a pool and then it goes back into the general revenue, I'm sure.
Was there any thought about just putting the revenue in our general fund?
You know, typically, whenever since we already, and that's a good question, that was brought out, but whenever we put this gambling mechanism in place 25 years ago, from the get-go, the gambling proceeds were, because we set up the Lottery Commission, were to go through the Lottery Commission to fund Hope. And I firmly believe in the Hope Scholarship, and I got 2 daughters that benefited from the Hope Scholarship. And removing it and putting it back into the general fund, in my mind, would just become a black hole for us to spend it on areas that may not necessarily do what other states are trying to do. And that's to give us fiscal responsibility to direct these dollars from where it was originally intended.
And maybe I should know the answer to this, but the Georgia Student Finance Commission, do they already do needs-based scholarships from that?
There are some needs-based already into the pre-K program, and that's, I don't know the exact number, but it's around 10 to 15%, I believe. And as you might know, the needs-based program with pre-K is on a lottery, strangely enough. So only those kids that can get this head start, if you will, which is another argument altogether. But they get this head start on a lottery system, so that not all kids have the pre-K available to them.
So would the needs-based be as for Hope as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Representative Chandler, you have a question, ma'am?
I do. Piggybacking, first of all, I have a couple on what has just been said about Atlantic City. I hear you say that one problem there was the high tax rate. and I know we're talking about a resort area. But what else will be different and keep us from getting in the mess that Atlantic City did?
And there's other states as well that got into the same
Yes.
trap that quite honestly thought that if you just continued to raise the tax rate, that the investment would continue to come, and that just didn't happen. And it showed up quite early, if you will, with Atlantic City. Again, this is nothing more than we're already doing. If you might, some of you might think, well, we don't do any of these casino-type gambling at all in the state. Well, that's not true. If you go to some of your convenience stores now, they're in the wrong place. You can see these very same machines up to a limit of 9 that are unsupervised and unregulated, in my opinion, ought to be eliminated. And we can do that through a license mechanism, so that if you buy a license to operate these machines, the only place you're going to see them is in a supervised area. These kids that are playing these machines, ladies and gentlemen, are not arcade machines. These are typically on the backside of a convenience store, and they're kids playing these things that are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and we need to move those out and put them into a licensed supervised scenario, which this does.
Those machines, though, that you mentioned, can these folks that are playing receive money? I thought it was other
You're not supposed to.
rewards. Okay.
You're not supposed to, but everybody knows how that works. So again, we need to have these in a supervised scenario.
And one other quick question. On lines, beginning on line 734, and several people have alluded to this, you're putting in money, it's addictive gambling prevention program.
Yes, ma'am.
But all I've heard is grants for folks that have an addiction problem. I've glanced at what's above, but would you say a little bit more about what the prevention piece is going to be?
That again is something that'll be worked out with the Gaming Commission as they move. And this is a program that hasn't been implemented yet, even though we gamble in Georgia. And we do have an addiction problem with some of the people that gamble in Georgia. So this is something that'll be handled by the Gaming Commission, as it's done in other states,
Thank you, sir.
strictly through a grant program.
Thank you, ma'am. I had a comment I was just going to make, and it just went right out of my head there. Oh, the other states, you're talking about the problem with Jersey and everything. I think one of the problems was the taxing problem there, and then they overbuilt. They got so many in the same areas, and a lot of the states around the New Jersey area where they had them started coming in with the casinos, and that sort of overbuilt in one area. I think trying to limit this is part of may solve problem with that, and also the resorts themselves. They're the ones that's going to be they put a lot of gambling addiction information out themselves, trying to prevent it or help people that have real serious problems. All right, we finally got this side woke up. See if we got any questions here, and I got a couple of my own. Number 17, I think you were first, sir.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you so very much for bringing this legislation forward. One of my questions is, I don't see anything addressed about the arts community. One of my concerns is the cannibalization of the arts community. Can we get a commitment that subsequently those discussions will be entered, and probably the arts community would feel a lot better if it was ingrained in law?
I appreciate that, and there is that argument that there could be some cannibalization of these artists that come in for entertainment, and I see it the exact opposite. If you guys might remember, yesterday or one day this week, I believe I saw a bill that exempted our symphony and others from sales tax on their tickets. So we're moving in that direction. I'm just not sure that we ought to put it in this bill, but if this committee deems it to be there, that we use a very small portion of the proceeds to protect the Savannah Music Festival or the Symphony of Atlanta or others, I'm absolutely willing to be open to that.
And lastly, Mr. Chair, I must say that I think the presenters' arguments have been most compelling, particularly when you consider, like some of us here, the impact that this would do for jobs, economic development, vendors, and other businesses. Certainly our commitment that we made to Hope Scholars. I would like this committee to consider a do pass motion so that we can have a healthy discussion of this issue over the summer. Being the posture that we're in, certainly this could not go over to the Senate, but certainly we could have a healthy discussion of this issue over the summer. We can entertain all the discussions for those who wish to bring forth input at that time, because another phase of this would be to get a referendum on the ballot. I think this would be a great opportunity for this committee to do just that. And with that, I am going to formally make a do pass motion, Mr. Chairman.
I'm not going to recognize you at this time for that motion. I do appreciate your enthusiasm, because no matter what legislation we bring up, you want to pass up casinos and up or destination resorts, and I do appreciate your enthusiasm, Representative Mitchell.
Mr. Chairman, I do believe this is a great opportunity for us to keep a commitment that we made to Hope Scholars, and the economic impact would be just great.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to cut you off at this point. Just to let you know where I stand. Number 18, I'm going to go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We got some questions, especially on this commission. Lines 155 and 156, you talk about no elected officials. I don't see any time frame after that. Is this saying as soon as somebody's out of office, the day they're out, they could be appointed to this commission, or should there be some kind of lag several years before they would be eligible?
If the gentleman wants to put that in as an amendment, I'm open to that, and that's a very good point. It just appoints a total of 5, and the governor has 3, and the lieutenant governor and speaker has others. But the gentleman does bring up a good point. This is one area that we need to be incredibly cautious about, and that the people that serve on this particular commission are knowledgeable in this particular field. As we move forward, this is, the very first appointees are incredibly important. So your point's well taken, and if you want to put that in as an amendment as we move along, I'll gladly accept that one.
All right, well, we'll follow along with what you just said on 173. It says that each member of the commission shall serve until his or her respective successor is appointed and qualified. I can't find anything in here that says what those qualifications are, that they'd be qualified to even perform on this commission.
That's it's somewhere in here.
It's somewhere?
Yeah.
I mean, is that it, just to be a resident of the state? Okay. All right. Final question, and you don't have to follow along. I've got these all marked, but on 233, the commission shall establish. 260, the commission shall have the ability. 275, the commission actually has subpoena power, something that we don't even have as a body. 284, the commission shall investigate. 299, the commission shall have full and absolute power and authority. We'll use that again on 305, full and absolute power and authority. We haven't gone into the maze, and there's a lot more shalls. Who does this commission report to? Who's controlling them?
And that's important. This needs to be at arm's length. This commission is essentially acting like an authority, and you want that. You want it independent as much as absolutely possible from any political influence. And they need to have the ability to go in and shut some folks down if they're not playing right.
All right, thank you. Representative Martin, you have a question. I think you got to leave in a minute. You said for another meeting, so we'll go ahead and hear you, sir.
I do. Just to follow up on Representative Mitchell's question regard to Hope, I think it's sort of a statement and a question that I would spread to the author, to the audience, to the members of the committee, and later should this move forward to the legislature. I think we're short-sighted as a state, and I appreciate the authors bringing the bill and pointing the revenue toward Hope. I like the dedication, of the revenue. But I personally think we're not looking at the whole picture if we are not looking at it as an overall economic development. If we're looking at this simply to fund, Hope, that's probably not enough. If we're looking at it simply to help an area for a period of time, that's not enough. If this doesn't work, if it and I'm not saying it's not, so I'm not being negative toward the proposal, Chairman. Would you not agree that what you're trying to build here is an industry that has a lot more? That's, clearly there's gaming going on. I mean, all the jokes have been around the capital about the destination resort versus using the word casino. Clearly there's gaming going on here, but is it not true that what you're looking to do here is to provide an opportunity for an industry around that function that includes other things? I'm told in many areas, and I think you mentioned it earlier, that much of the revenue comes from eating and entertainment and so forth. So I guess my question, am I right in looking at this, that if I were looking at it just to be a funder of hope, and how much money we could wring out of certain people, that would, for the gaming side, that would be the wrong thing. If we were to look at it for a more holistic approach, is that a fair look?
And I'm glad you brought that up. That seems to be the focus on where the money needs to go, but there's other things that are involved here. Again, just in one of these resorts alone, there's between 5,000 and 10,000 jobs within one resort. Do you know how much we threw at Baxter and Caterpillar, and I can go down the list on and on and on, to create jobs? We threw every single incentive, whether it be tax incentives for employment. They're not asking for a dime. None of these people are asking for a dime. All they want to do is to come here and operate. And the hope piece is part of it, but you hit on the very crux of it. 60% of all the revenue that these destination resorts will create must come from non-gaming, according to the bill. So if the jobs don't matter, if the investment doesn't matter, if the ancillary jobs that are attached to this don't matter, then let's start having another holistic look at the way that we create these tax incentives to bring these jobs here. These folks aren't asking for a penny. Good, thank you.
All right, number 13. Yes, ma'am, Chairman Cooper.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the chairman, and I'm sorry I got here late. The Atlanta traffic is terrible, and I would say that I think there's one of these probably proposed over by the Dome and all, only to add to the Atlanta traffic. I have real concerns over a couple of issues, and I don't want to be disrespectful to any of my colleagues, or to you, who's on your BlackBerry. It's being disrespectful to me, sir.
Sorry. The wife called in sick, so go right ahead. Madam Chairman, I help?
Right. First of all, and I think one of the reasons that they're not asking for tax breaks is because this is such a lucrative business for the casinos. So they don't really feel like there's a need, because it is, if they're successful, a very lucrative business. So let's just get that out in the open. As far as being not disrespectful to any of my colleagues, in destinations, I can see the Savannah area, certainly, or along our coast where people are interested in going. And I guess you could even call Atlanta a destination place. But, I don't, with as crowded as it is to try to get North Georgia and to put one up there, and I love the North Georgia mountains, when you've already got one in Cherokee, and if they're thinking about putting one along the Alabama coast, I think if you're going to toss it up between our part of our state that touches Alabama, people might still just want to go on down to the one that's on the ocean. So it seems like, and sometimes when we do things, we seem to go in the extremes. I'm not saying I'm for or against, but it seems like we could start out with not 4, but a lower number, and really try this and see what's going to happen. Secondly, I apparently live in an area where a lot of federal retirees like to live. And several of those have been in the federal law enforcement area. And they have come to me over the past 2 or 3 years about the problems with our lottery, and how people who are in the business of putting those machines in that my colleague was talking about, how they manipulate the system and they don't pay the taxes. Apparently on these machines, there is a way that the lottery could lock up and have it where the people that are checking it or own the shops couldn't manipulate how much business the machines have. Instead, they are just reporting whatever they want to report. So if a machine takes in $40,000 worth, let's say, they're reporting that it only took in $10,000 in paying the state. You know, gaming is such an open area for corruption, and I'm with the people who look at this commission and all, and its independence, but somehow over in our lottery, we've got people on there that own these machines, and there are a lot of safeguards that can put in that our lottery is not putting in, and we're already getting cheated to a great amount of money. So I have real concerns as this goes forward to all the safeguards. If we should go forward on this, that, you know, that there are safeguards and stops and all, and people have a lot to lose if somehow or other they get on this commission and use it. I'm real hesitant about that. And the other thing is I'm hesitant about hope and also the concerns of addiction. I mean, that's my area of specialization in nursing, and we already have a terrible opiate problem in our state. I mean, and that's an addiction. We have an alcohol problem, and we are just fixing to add another one. And I know you can't legislate behavior, but I have real concerns about the bill, and, you know, getting my vote's going to take a lot of convincing and a lot of safeguards, if that's even possible down the road. So thank you for your work on this, but I think it still needs a great deal of work. And if we're going to do something, I sure would like, if we have to do something that members of this body just can feel compelled, I'd sure feel a lot better if it started off a little bit slower, because we can always come back and add. You can't take away if you put 4 of these in and they don't do well, and I'm concerned about the corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Let me say 2 words right here. I think in one of the pieces of legislation I saw, I know the local areas is going to have to be voted on by the local municipality or county or wherever before one would go in to start with, if you know, ever have whatever number we come up with.
That's a constitutional amendment, yes, sir.
Yeah, that'd be, okay. But going back to these machines and the back of gas stations and everywhere else, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago we passed, seemed like House Bill 480, Chairman Matt Ramsey's bill, that tied these in. All these little gaming machines are tied into the lottery. They've got stickers now. We had a huge debate, and 2 or 3 years later we were still hearing bills relating to that, about those machines that the lottery, I can't remember the equipment they were getting to make sure these things are tied in. I'll get the lottery folks here to make a presentation for us, because last time I had talked to them, that appeared to be working. That the cash, because I know they had cash awards of going out sometime $30,000 or $40,000 to folks when we heard testimony 3 or 4 years ago about this. And that was the intent, was to try to stop the cash awards that we were doing back then. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, it's not just the cash awards. What I'm trying to tell you is there's a way the machines take how much money they've taken in, and apparently the state, I haven't looked at this in the last couple of months, so I'm pulling it up from memory, and we've had a lot of other bills, but apparently you can manipulate that if the people who have the machines in their shops can manipulate the number, or they just under-report. Like I say, if their machine, let's say, brought in 40,000, was used to bring in $40,000 worth, they just report to the state that they only took in 10,000, so they don't pay taxes on that other. And that's where the problem is. And there are machines that can stop that, and apparently our lottery has not chosen to put in that kind of machines to cut down on this manipulation.
We'll do some checking with the lottery on that. Thank you, ma'am. All right, we got 3 questions left, Mr. Chairman. You all right?
Certainly.
Okay. Number 16, I think I skipped you a while ago, sir.
Since you're the boss, I'll take that. Good morning. I'd like to say that I'm listening to the questions that my colleagues are asking. I had the opportunity, Billy Mitchell and I had the opportunity this summer that I had received an email from the NCSLG, and I was trying to figure out what it was. It was legislative, National Council of State Legislators in Gaming. They have a meeting. They meet 2 or 3 times a year, and they invite everybody. Everybody up here sitting at this on the ice should have opportunity to go. They'll do scholarship. We went out there; it was very informative, and the same issues, the questions that you were asking, they have people, experts that explain exactly how the gaming thing's done, especially when you're doing startup. This is very informative. I think that we all, Mr. Chairman, I think we all try to invite them to bring their next meeting here to Georgia, so we all can take part in it.
Well, we need to look at that. We sure do, sir.
I mean, it's very good. I mean,
Okay.
they gave us scholarships to make sure that we got out there and back.
Now, where was that?
They flew us out to Arizona.
Arizona.
Yeah.
I like Arizona.
Yeah.
Be good. I've rode
Yeah, but
motorcycle. I do a lot of motorcycle riding in Arizona.
It's nice. It's
Okay.
nice. But I think it's something we need to look into.
Thank you, sir. We'll get with you on that. Okay. Thank you. All right, we got number 29. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, 60% of the revenue has to come from non-gaming, which means that 40% max revenue is from gaming.
Yes.
And that is the part that is taxed, that is subject to the gross receipts tax, so that the 20% gross receipt tax would be only on the gambling winning portion of it, which is a maximum of 40% of the revenue generated by the destination resort. What other types of taxes would be generated at, for example, the Premier Resort, the one in the 900,000 county person? Would there be corporate income tax? Would there be property tax? Would there be sales tax? And if so, do you have an idea of what those might be?
Yes, and hotel motel tax as well.
Forgot
So,
that. But
there-
types of taxes?
All the litany that you would normally have in sales tax, corporate income tax, anything that normally is taxed with a business, they would be subject to over and above the 20% tax rate on gaming. So whenever you're looking at that 60% of the revenue that's coming out, all of that is going to be subject to any of the local, state and local taxes that are there.
Would the gross receipts also be, again, subject to the corporate income tax?
The gross receipts would be subject to,
Would they be included in the revenues, which would be used to calculate corporate income, that then would be
yes,
the benchmark for the corporate income tax? So
Yes.
the gross receipts
6%.
seems that they would be subject to double taxation.
it is a tax. That 6% tax is on any sale that comes out of there. So yes, they're going to be subject to that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, number 22. Ms.
Thank
Rakestraw, back
you.
to you again. Now, this is your last shot at the apple here.
Thank
okay?
you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so the machines that are in convenience stores now, you're saying those would now fall under gaming?
We would ask that the Gaming Commission place all video lottery terminals under their purview, and we would ask that the Gaming Commission place a license fee for those folks, the same as they would in operating. Now, they would be grandfathered in, but, you know, the license fee can be cost prohibitive.
Is that, would that license fee be for the operators or for the, like, the convenience store locations where those games are?
For the machines.
So the operator, the equipment operator
The
would pay the license fee?
The equipment.
Okay. And then I had another question. How is the hotel motel industry responding to this? Because I know that they have expressed some concerns about the $5 transportation tax that we put on, that it's hurting their business and their ability to draw people. And so I see this as a way to help draw more people to, you know, not just to that destination, but to the ancillary and other hotels, because once we have, you know, something like this that's an attraction, it should increase our tourism a great deal and help those hotel motel operators to offset that tax. They said that's hurting their business and keeping conventions and things like that in Atlanta.
That 1,000-room minimum hotel that they're going to be required to have, they will be subject to the $5 fee, just as anyone else in the state.
But has the industry, I guess, expressed how this would help or hurt their business? I see it as helping it, but has the industry spoken up and said one way or the other?
As far as I know, they've been silent.
Okay, thank you.
All right, number 12. Chairman Powell, enlighten us on this endeavor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Stephen, got a couple of questions, and I really don't know where to start at. Since there's only two people in this building that are still serving that was here when the lottery was passed, and that's Mr. Smyrie and myself, we both had a little bit of experience of going through this day of a constitutional amendment. I have some concerns, but let me first ask a couple of questions. I noticed nowhere in here we've taken horse racing completely out?
Yes, sir.
Is that, for what reason was that, if we're looking at destinations and economic development?
There was concern that the horse racing piece has evolved to the point that it's not, I'm trying to find the right words for this. It's tough to do horse racing anymore in today's environment without the addition of a casino to make it profitable. And most of the facilities have told us that it has to turn into a racino to be a profitable endeavor. I am totally open to adding that back to the bill. But again, we're looking at massive investments, tourism destination resorts. If the horse racing piece becomes part of this, I'm absolutely open to that.
All right. And the reason I asked that question, for years, a lot of us has always known that probably you don't make money, the state won't make a lot of money out of the pari-mutuel on horse racing. True. But the big money comes in from roughly $1 billion plus a year to add to the agricultural industry in the state, if it was ever approved.
That's what most people don't get, is that piece of it.
Second question I've got is, and something has troubled me, and haven't been involved in this bill since this has been over in economic development to try to move this bill forward. But I got concerns about the idea that we're up to 4 destination areas now. From, I think it was at 2, now it's at 4. From a product of rural Georgia, I have concerns that we're asking 159 counties, the citizens and taxpayers and voters, to vote for an issue. In 159 counties, it's only going to be a benefit to 4 counties or 4 locations.
On the tourism destination
Has there been
resort?
any discussion through you and whoever's working this bill up about parity statewide, that every citizen in the state should have that opportunity? And I'll give a good example. I know in my heart and soul that there'll never be a casino that'll operate in my district because it's not a business model.
Yep.
And all these casinos would build based on a business model to be able to survive and to profit. But should the people in Hart, Franklin, and Madison County be told that y'all don't matter, except we want your vote for something that's going to go to help somebody else?
And I'll answer it this way. It's the Hope Scholarship is given to Hope Scholars for the past 25 years in every single county and every city in the state. So whether the destination product is located within that county, the benefit comes to those students that live within that county and graduate from Hart County schools. So I would say it was a statewide benefit. The other piece of it, and that will be in the constitutional amendment, is even before the locations can be considered, the local residents are going to have to vote for it. And that's probably, in my mind, going to be the hardest obstacle they're going to have to get around, is if it's going to be down in Valdosta, Georgia, for example, on I-75, to capture the Florida residents there. Those folks that are in Wild Adventures may have a real interest in having this facility close to those. But before that can even happen, two things have to happen. The local commissioners or city officials in that taxing district are going to have to vote to even put it on the ballot. So there's really 2 more besides a statewide bill that has to take place. So there's several different roadblocks, if you will. But I would contend that every single high school student that is graduating from college, on the work that you and Representative Smyrie have done, has been enormous. But we need to fill the hole. And as far as the economic development piece for that local city, they'll have to vote for it. But again, I don't look at it as they don't matter. It's just the model wouldn't matter in that district.
But should it not be open-ended and let free enterprise? if most people in Georgia believe in free enterprise?
Oh, and that,
Should it not be left up to treat every county equally?
and that's
And
what we're
if those counties want to pass a referendum that they'll be acceptable, then let the business model for a casino operation or a horse track or whatever, let them decide based on the business model where they want to go.
I misunderstood your question, and getting back to the population piece, which I think we need to take out, and then allow the gaming commission to make those decisions based on their ability to fund a certain level, then everybody in the state has an opportunity to play. And if you take the population pieces out, then everybody in the state has an opportunity.
Next question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I continue to hear the enthusiasm and the exuberance about let's give more money to the Hope. You know, I've been up here years, and it's always been amazing how they can say that the Hope is running dry when Georgia has had, for folks in Georgia who don't like to gamble, they sure do love to play the lottery because we've got one of the most successful lotteries in the nation. But I have some concerns with, has there been any discussions about if the people of Georgia vote, and that's the first key, they're going to have something rational that they can approve if they want to vote for it. But has there been any discussion about any revenues going to a bigger problem than I see than giving more money to the Hope Scholarship, and that's the health care problem that we have in Georgia. We have rural hospitals that are closing. We're in dire straits. We don't know what's going to happen in Washington. The number one hole in my 27 sessions up here, the number one hole in the budget has always revolved around health care, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's medicine or medical services for inmates or state health benefit plan or any and all of these things combined. The number one hole and the number one issue that's driving the economic train of our budget is health care. Has there been any thought about dedicating this money to something that's going to benefit every Georgian, not just the high schoolers, not just the university professors, not just the building program that we don't have a whole lot to say about with the university system, of putting this, if the people of Georgia ratify this, putting that money to benefit every citizen in Georgia, and that's health care.
Point well taken, and I'm glad you asked the question in the Senate version, and I'm more than happy to add it to this one. They carved out, as I recall, about 10% of the revenue from gambling proceeds to be dedicated to other sources, to be rural health care, and I forget what the other couple of things were there, but it was addressed in the Senate. More than happy to add it to this one. Good question.
So that would be open. So your answer is,
yes,
this would certainly be open-ended for discussion. One is about parity across the state so that every county would have an interest, and secondly, that would be no problems about looking at fostering the debate about money being spent for health care.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And on the first part of your question, once we eliminate the population piece of this particular bill, I think we've solved that problem.
All right, we generated one more, Mr. Chairman, and then I got two little questions, and hopefully we'll be about it. Number 19, Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very, very brief. I just want to fall back on one thing that I think you said originally, that in the constitutional amendment, you're talking about 6 locations?
That's so that we won't have to come back and visit and go back to the statewide general voter again. If it were successful, that we start out not with 6 locations, that we could add 2 as the population shifts in the state or the need arises. So we're starting off with 4. Constitutional amendment provides for 6 so that only a general bill will be allowed, be required to go back and add 2 more if needed, if ever needed.
Okay, I just want a clarification on that. And then the only other thing that I'll just throw out as a point of discussion, something that I think that you need to look at, is when you talk about a commission. A couple of years ago, I served on a study committee where we looked at the different boards and authorities throughout the entire state. And one of the problems that we had right there is that they fell under different people and different, like maybe under the Secretary of State's office or this or that or whatever. But in actuality, there was no mechanism for controlling them. They had their own thing. So like if there was a complaint, the complaint had to come right to the board and then they had to decide. There was no mechanism. I think maybe a model to look at might be the Kentucky Horse Racing Association, because I think they've had some pretty good luck with that. So I would think that there need to be, if you did in fact get to the point of having to have a commission, that there would be somebody that, or some group, maybe legislative approval. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but there needs to be some teeth behind it.
Point taken.
All right, thank you, sir. I think the intent is to keep politicians out of this as much as possible.
Yes, sir.
Probably pretty smart.
Probably pretty smart. I have generated another question. Oh, shoot. Okay, sorry. We'll get you out of here in a second. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, because I
It's
want
all
to
right,
get
ma'am.
out too, but I need to say something. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having worked in the addiction field, I've shared with you some of my concerns. And I'm not sure that this is possible, but in light of our hearing so much about all the money this is going to bring into the state, have there been any studies in other states regarding the cost of this kind of program in human lives as well as financially in relation to the money that it brings in?
That'll have to be I'm sure a study as we evolve this thing to get those numbers together. But I can tell you it was something that we, in years gone by, 2.5 decades ago, that was a piece that I wish we had stuck into our original gambling legislation, because it should be on for those that participate and those that do have an addiction problem. The program itself should fund it. And we think this particular bill for the addiction piece for gambling, we think the money there will handle our scenario, but we don't know. We need to get those numbers.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I think we looked at the possible revenue, just in taxes. I think was what, 500 million or so, 600 million. Is that what we had talked about?
About 500 million
Okay.
in one location.
Okay. I got two questions, and we'll get back to number 13 in a minute. On line 369, you talked about no company may hold more than one destination resort license concurrently. So we're wanting to bring in I guess a variety of players in the field right here. They can only have, not even two, they gotta have only one license is what you're anticipating.
And to create competition between the those that want to come and locate in Georgia and make this investment.
Okay. And line 385, entertainment facilities have a maximum capacity of 3,500 people. Now, I could see that probably in the larger one, but was this for all the destination resorts, Mr. Chairman, or was this just for the larger one?
This original was for the larger two facilities that we had, and it can still remain at a maximum capacity of 3,500 because the market itself will
maximum
dictate.
capacity. Oh,
Yeah.
That's a good word I missed there. Thank you.
The market will dictate what
Okay.
the
All right, we got one more question here. Yes, Madam Chairman. Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to tell one of my co-members that there are studies from think tanks and from other places, and I'm sure that some of the people in this audience can supply them about the cost to society, the hard cost and the cost from addiction and all. There are studies on that are available.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And the other question that came up about the gaming machines that are in the gas stations, convenience stores, or whatever, I think there's some folks from the lottery here, and I'm going to ask for them, get them after the meeting, and ask for them to get us a letter explaining what's going on now with these machines. I think they're tied into the revenue department now, and they can't make those switches and play the games that they used to be able to play on that. So we're going to get some answers, maybe get a letter from the Lottery Commission to each committee member to try to answer that question for us on that. What I would suggest at this point, we've heard some testimony. We've heard the author here put his bill before us. A lot of suggestions have been made for some changes. I would suggest the committee members that want to see changes get with the author and talk to him about it. And then as we go through the summer months and the beginning next session, see what changes y'all want to put together, because this will be back. We're not over. We will be dealing with this again next year. So let's start trying to true it up, as they say, and getting some things together that we really want to look at. And again, Representative Mitchell, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're here for a hearing today. So, no, I'm not going to recognize you for a motion, my friend. All right. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank y'all for being here today. It's been an informative meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
We're
you, Mr.
adjourned.
Chairman and members.